Hello and welcome to episode 68 of Just Keep Writing,
a podcast for writers
by writers
to keep you writing.
I'm Marshall.
I'm Nick.
I'm Brent.
And I'm Will.
All right, gents, we are back again, and it's time to talk editing again. So let's get right on to it. Do we want to just start throwing questions at Brent? Is that what we're doing this time? Or do we have a different approach there?
This is what we're doing. Sorry, I'm trying to control things I can control today, okay? Oh god, this is why I don't have any friends.
That's why I handed it over to you. That was my handoff. That was my handoff, dude.
Yes.
So here's the mic.
Okay. That's why I have no friends.
Do you want to pick it up?
No. Okay,
you have us, buddy. You have us.
Thanks. Brent, we are going to talk about self-editing, and we are going to start off with how you self-edit. And then we're going to ask you some questions, and then we're going to have just a big session about how we're going about edits and advice from each other, but really lean heavily into Brent since he is the professional editor. So,
the pro.
The star
editor. Okay. That feels so weird. I still not okay. Self-editing. I know it feels it though. All right. So, okay. So, should I talk about this from like the standpoint of a novel, or are we talking like short stories? Or
I want you to cover the gambit of like if it's different for short stories versus novels. Like, tell us everything. Drop your knowledge bombs. Go.
Okay, so for I'll just start with novels. I think 'cause that's where a lot of our audience probably is. So with novels, my rule of thumb. And this is hard for a lot of people, I know, but I do not do a single bit of editing until I am done. Like it has to be, I have to write the end. Then is when I think about editing. And my rationale for that is I'll give this metaphor. For me, it would be like trying to work on a sculpture without first having all of the clay to do it. Like I view editing as like you finish the story, you have your big ass lump of clay or whatever, and then you can start massaging it, manipulating it, sculpting it into whatever you need it to be. But you got to have the material first. So that would be my first strongest bit of advice. Finish, then you can manipulate. So once I finish, what I do is I give it time to cool off. I don't jump in right away to like start editing. So typically, unless I'm on some kind of deadline, if I finish a project, I'm giving it at the very least a month before I don't think about it. I don't look at it. I don't touch it. Just give it a month, let it cool off. You want to, at least for me, I want to come back to it with the eyes of a reader as much as possible and not the eyes of an author. So I have to create some distance. So I try to aim for like 2 to 3 months though. So let's just say I, do the 3 months and I come back to it. And what I do next is I read it completely. I read it all the way through. And as I'm reading it, I take notes. I take notes on like what stands out to me as like things that are working, things that aren't working, things I might want to think about, questions I have for myself as I'm like going through it. And there's no rhyme or reason to it. I'm just taking notes. So I do that, go through the whole thing. And then after I look at the notes I have and I categorize them. Are they structural notes? Are they character notes? Are they plot notes? Like, are they world building notes? And I just break them out into each of those different categories. And so then I do macro to micro in the terms of editing. So I look at the structural notes and think about, okay, how do I solve these issues on the structural level? Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to fix a character note and then you go back to your structural notes, and to fix the structural notes, that character needs to go away. So you just did all that work on fixing this character, and then the structural notes kicks the character out entirely. So you want to maximize your time in the best way possible. So I start with the structural notes because that's where the biggest seismic changes will happen. And then from there, I'll look at plot. Now, I'm more of a plot person, so this order may not necessarily work for everybody. You may want to go to character first, but I prefer, I'm more plot driven. So I look at the plot. Are the details working? Or, how do I fix them? So once I do that, then I look at the character stuff. And then those are the three big ones I look at when I'm doing my first round of trying to actual editing. So the thing is that you're going to have to do a couple of rounds of this before, at least I do a couple of rounds of this where I'm rereading it again after the changes I make before I even send it out to anybody to read, to beta read. But yeah, I guess that's a very broad arcing overview of how I start.
So I want to ask you some questions before the boys do. I want to ask you about structure. When you say structure versus plot, are you looking at structure through a 3-act structure? Are you looking at it through a 4-act structure? Are you looking at a 7 plot point structure? How do you actually look at structure?
You know what? Every project's different. So what I will do is after I'm done with the story, because when I'm drafting, I'm not as well. Again, every project's different. So it just depends on how much pre-work I did. But I think about it okay, maybe I started off with the 3-act structure. Would this be a little stronger with the 4-act? Or what would it look like with the 7 points? Or what would it look like with this other structure? So I do take the time to think about did I actually pick the right structure? And while I also say structure too, I think about, did I pick the right POV for each of these scenes? Did I pick the right does this work in first person? Maybe it'll be stronger in third person. Can I blend these different types of tenses? Does it work like that? So it's just kind of almost being willing to sort of just question your choices, because I think when you're writing your first draft, we lean into what feels comfortable, not necessarily what feels right or what is right for the story. So we lean to what's comfortable with us and what we're used to. So I think once you're in the editing process, you want to play around, question a little bit your choices, and also be willing to accept that you may have to do a lot more work than you want to get the story right, because especially in the structural phase, because it is a lot of work to realize this story needed to be in first person when you wrote the whole thing in third person. So that's the phase of editing where for me, I'm excited about it, but I could see why for some people that may be a phase where they feel a lot of despair, because it's I've done all this work and now you're telling me I gotta go back and make these huge changes to it. But yeah, so to answer your question, I consider all of those options when I'm looking at these bigger tent poles of the story.
Awesome. And then plot. So what do you look at after you've looked at structure? What do you look at when you're looking at plot? What are some things that you're looking for?
So I'm a huge stickler for plot holes. If I see, I'm looking for, wait, did that actually make sense? Or why the hell? All right, sometimes I'll be well, why didn't they just? Did this conflict actually need to happen, or could it have been resolved with a conversation? Does it make sense for this to have actually happened? And because sometimes I think, especially in first drafts, which you should do. So I don't want anyone to think I'm saying don't do this in first drafts, but we write the thing that's fun, or we write the thing that excites us, and that thing may not necessarily be logical to the story. And when I say logical, maybe logical isn't the right word. Consistent. I'll say consistent because I mean, dragons in the sky aren't exactly logical, but consistent to the world that you have created. So, that's one thing I look at. Look at consistency, and also too, like if there's a twist, like how we talk about TRDs. If there's a TRD, did I actually establish that TRD in the way that feels authentic, or does it feel cheap and like I was trying to write my way out of a difficult scenario? Which when you're doing your first draft, totally do that. If you get stuck, just write your way out of it. But you just know when it's time to edit, you're going to have to reckon with that and decide like, okay, do I keep this or how do I fix it? And so, what else do I look at in terms of plot? Also, to the ending. Does the ending land? Does the reader feel fulfilled? And not necessarily that every single plot thread has to be resolved, because I don't think most books do that. But does it feel satisfactory? Do you walk away having some kind of catharsis from it? So, I think that's what those are kind of the big things I look at when talking about plot.
Okay, so you also mentioned character. So when you look at character, what are some of the things you're looking for in character? I'm taking notes.
So me, I know for me, my first drafts, I insert too many characters. I look at like, okay, who can I chop? What characters actually work to get better? Can I merge together and actually work better as like a, I don't know, like a combo character, like fusing them together. Like because sometimes like I like big cast and I like big stories. I mean, it's why I like fantasy. One of my writing friends, Devon Sanders, he's the editor for Fire. He made a joke one time. He was like, "Yeah, Brent's stories start off at Infinity War and expand from there." And and that's something that's my own personal weakness. Like I like big, sprawling stories, but you have to work your way up to those. So one thing I know personally for my own writing is like I have to chop characters. I have to say, okay, is this person actually necessary? Is this person actually needed? Like, and going through, and also too, what I'll do is I will kind of map out each character's journey, like little bullet points. Like, okay, this person did this, and then kind of like figure out, okay, did they change throughout the story? Should they have changed? And if not, why? And if yes, why? Like try to basically figure out like what I'm wanting the reader to get out of each of these characters. And I personally think it's stronger when you can have more characters who are changed by the end of the story in some way. So that's kind of what I look for in terms of characters too. And also too, I mean, I think about, this is one thing I've actually done recently, and I picked it up from Brit. She's one of the editors at Orbit. She kind of did this thread on Twitter, and I thought it was really interesting. And she was saying something about like, look at your side characters, the unnamed characters, the minor characters. How many of them do you default to men? How many of them are women? And actually going through and looking at, okay, I have these nameless side characters. Like, how can I use them to show a more inclusive world? And so it was one thing she mentioned, and it kind of like, it really resonated with me. So it's something that I do now. Like I look at like the ratios of like the unnamed characters and see how those numbers play out, I guess.
Okay, and then you also mentioned world building. When is world building something you look at the very end? And if so, why?
So I look at it at the very end.
Sorry, can I add something to that real quick?
Yeah.
On the world building question, I guess Will's question, and then adding this: how much world building do you do up front, and then have to edit around or recreate at the end?
Okay, so it varies from project to project, but in general, I do a shit ton of world building. Like I like to before I even draft, I like to feel like I have a really strong grasp on like what the world is and like how it works and its various components. Now, I've tried to pull back a little bit on it recently because I think what was happening in some of the earlier trunked novels that I have is that I was doing so much world building that I was married to it to a point where it got in the way of telling the story.
Yep.
So, God, I'm loath to bring him up because it kind of came out he was kind of a dick, but he said something really good about world building. Paul Kruger, the guy who wrote Steel Crow Saga, came out as a total asshole, but he said something about like it's okay in the process of writing the story to just throw some element of world building out the window if it works and it's cooler and it's more fun. And I kind of like take that to heart. But when I edit for world building, what I'm looking for is that detail needed, or is it just like a quick little? Am I doing a Robert Jordan? See, and I personally don't care for how Robert Jordan would do these things where and some people love it, but he would spend a page talking about the spoon or like a history of like this fabric or something. I don't want to do that. So I'm looking for those places in the book where I'm like, okay, is it really organic for the characters to be talking about this? Like in regular conversation, I'm not going to talk with someone about, oh, do we know the origin of the snapback? Let's talk about this. Like, that it's something that you do. You just put the hat on. You don't think about all the things that go into it. So I'm looking for those places where I'm like, is that an actual detail that someone would really discuss in this world? Or am I just trying to explain something to the reader in an inauthentic way? So that's kind of what I think about when I'm doing like the world building editing. Thinking about, I'm trying to take away or reassess how I'm presenting details that don't really feel like they're needed for the reader to grasp. It's okay to know more than you actually put on the page. Like, yeah. And I think that's because it's exciting. You're building this world, you're building all these cool things, and you want to tell the reader all about them, but they don't necessarily need to know all about them. So I think when you're going through that first draft, look for those spaces where you were just excited to talk about this thing you came up with and figure out, should I really actually be telling someone this?
I have a question. So when I see this a lot, and I think it's even come up in our Discord when people are doing going back to edit something, especially if it's a bigger piece. I guess I kind of have two questions. Do you have advice for folks that feel overwhelmed when it comes down to this? And do you have any like tips and tricks on how to kind of chunk it, where it doesn't feel like, oh, I wrote 100,000 words and now I have to read all of this and change things, and how do I do it? And one of the things when back in the day too, when talking to my students about when they revise things, or go back to revise and edit things, it's not just, spell check. It's you have to rewrite sentences. You have to move things around. You have to, like you said earlier, take characters out. So are there ways to approach this to where people don't just start freaking out and just trunk the novel and start something new?
Yes. My biggest advice is one, create that distance from the work, because I think if you don't create the distance and you just jump in right after you finish drafting it, you're going to, understandably, you have a lot of emotions. You're invested in it. It's your baby. Like, it's something you've spent time with every day for however long it took you to write the 100,000 words. So you want to create that distance where you can kind of like approach it with not necessarily coldness, but you want to be able to approach it with a bit less attachment. So that would be my first bit of advice. Really, if you're able to, I know it's not always an option, but if you're able to create that distance. Also, a to-do list. I do it every time. I will not touch any kind of editing until I create my to-do list. So I'll write my notes and do my questions and ask myself things, then break them out, into those various categories. But then after that, I do a to-do list and I will number out like, okay, I'm going to go through the story and only address these issues first, then these issues, then these issues. And because it's very easy to get overwhelmed if you're trying to hold in your head, like, oh, I'm editing for this world building piece. I'm editing for this character thing. I'm editing this bit of dialogue. Oh, I need to change the wording of this sentence. It's too much. You will drive yourself crazy. So what I do is a to-do list. I'll do first thing. I'm going to look at structure. I don't care while I'm reading if I notice words are misspelled or if I notice character names are off or anything like that. I'm just strictly structure. Then after that, I'll do plot, reading strictly for plot. Now, this is going to require you to reread your story a bunch, but the beauty in that is that you're going to get sick of your story, and it's going to be good that you get sick of it, because by being sick of it, you can be objective about it. Because once you're tired of it and it's like, this shit again, like you can be more cutthroat in your editing. And I know that's weird to tell you to be detached from your baby, but that's really what you want to do to, I think, edit it effectively. Because when it gets into the hands of, that pro editor, once you sell that book, they're going to love the book because they wouldn't have bought it otherwise, but they're going to have that same level of objectivity. So you have to find a way to create that for yourself.
Well, and I imagine that you would also, the more you read it and stuff, you'll find the spots that if you're tired of it or you're bored by certain parts, that means someone who's reading it might feel that way too. And that's what you're saying is about being cutthroat, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, there'll be parts where I'm like, I don't know if this is working. Neil Gaiman, I'm going to paraphrase here, but he said something along the lines of like, when a reader tells you that something isn't working, they're usually right. But when they try to give you a solution, they're usually wrong. So what I think he was saying is like, trust your instinct. When you're reading it and something feels off, there's probably a reason that feels off, and wrangle with it. But again, I do it in steps. Like if I'm reading it for structure and I come across something that feels wrong plot wise, I don't think about it. It's only structure. Got to move on. And I think by compartmentalizing that, like it makes it a lot easier to grapple with.
Nick, you were gonna ask a question?
Yeah, no, Brent, I actually love what you said about how each pass you're focusing on something different, which is, and I don't remember the original author who told this person and how it got to me. But they do something that when they write, they do layers. Their first draft is always their base layer. After that, they're going in and improving one thing at a time. Plot, characters, side characters, subplots, things like that. And so it kind of reminded me of that. And it kind of brought another question to me that you can compartmentalize that. Where I think that's a skill set of its own, because I don't think I can do that. I'm ADHD and I'm everything all at once. Let's go. For those that edit page by page, what's your recommendation for them to get through it? Because this came up in a writers group I'm in, and it's like I got 10 pages to edit. The first 3 pages are done in a day. The next 3 pages take about 2-3 weeks, and then the last 3 or 4 pages are about like 6 months. Right? How do you keep working yourself through page by page by page with your edits? Do you think it's better to just do plot, just do characters, or do you think there's a viable way to make editing interesting, I guess, throughout that process, chapter by chapter?
Yeah, I think there is. So this will still in a way be like what I'm saying, but it'll be different. So color code. So before you even start like the editing, come up with color codes for each thing. So like blue for something that's world building, orange for character, or green for plot. And you go through page by page, read it, and what you notice on each one color coded. So read through it first, but do all your color coding. So in that way, your each page, you are doing everything all at once, but you're not trying to fix it all at once. You're identify it all at once, go page by page. And then when you come back, you can start page by page tackling it, but you'll know what each one is. So you won't forget, like, oh, why did that thing bother me? Like, what kind of issue was it? Oh, it's a character issue because it's already highlighted. So you could go in page by page after that. So like first, like I said, set up your color coding for each issue, go through it page by page, use all your color coding, and then come back around again. And then you can fix it page by page, and you'll have identified everything you wanted to tackle. Now, the drawback to that, though, is like if it's a bigger structural issue, you may have to kind of accept that some of your color coding on future pages may have to be chucked out the window because you have to do a big structural change. But I'm always an advocate of like, do whatever you need to do to get you through it. And even if it makes a little more work for you later, because a little more work for you later and still getting it finished is better than never finishing it at all. So that would be my advice if you're one of those kind of people who can't necessarily compartmentalize it page by, like, element by element.
So, Brent, my question is then, like, how did you actually get better at editing?
I got better, one, by actively like looking for the ways that other people talk about editing. So for instance, I was telling Will before we started recording that I actually keep a document. It's a ever-growing document where if I see anything writing related that I think is interesting or like helpful or kind of eye-opening for me, I keep it all in one document. So I have and I segment it out. So I have stuff about editing, stuff about drafting, plotting, etc. So I keep that because the thing is like, no matter how much I write, I'm never going to remember all of the various tricks and tips and skills that people have passed my way. Some stuff sticks, some stuff I have to remind myself of. So I just keep a document of that information, and it's been extremely helpful. Also, too, this is going to be a tongue-in-cheek answer, but just keep writing. I mean, that's honestly one of the best ways to edit, because it's like, if the more you write and the more you go in to edit your own stories, the more you're going to start to see the things that you think your crutches, the things that you kind of always do, and the things that that are your strengths too. You'll see your strengths. You'll see those things that you could stand to work on, and I learned through by just writing over and over again. Like, world building's a strength in my first draft, but adding too many characters is definitely a weakness. So it's one of those things. Also, to read, you have to read other people's work and give them feedback on their work. And this is why I also I encourage people, if they have a chance to be a slush reader, be a slush reader, because by being a slush reader and just like reading story after story after story, you start to intuitively pick up on like what makes stories work, and like what's a good opening, or like why did this character arc not work. So just like reading and beta reading and giving people feedback on their stories, and like just seeing how other people craft words will help you understand your writing better, and you'll be able to self-edit better too. And that's been I think that's more than anything, that's been my biggest thing. Like, just keep writing and keep reading. I mean, that's really the simplest answer.
So, do you go about how you edit differently than when you're you're professionally editing someone else?
Absolutely. And the reason I do it differently is because what I need isn't necessarily what every writer needs. And when I'm reading someone else's story and trying to edit with them, I very much want to establish, like, what I always try to do is I try to tell them, okay, I read your story and this is what I think you're trying to do. Tell me if I'm wrong or where I'm off base, and let's try to meet in the middle. Like, I at least when I'm working with someone else in their story, I very much want to I want to guide. I don't want to command. Like, I want to kind of like see, like, okay, this is what I'm feeling. This is what I'm thinking. These are things that I'm seeing, and give me your feedback. Like, how do you feel about it? And I, I always tell like them, I'm like, take what you need and throw the rest out. Like, because end of the day, it's your story, it's your name. They're not gonna look at me. It's your piece. So I need you to feel as happy and comfortable with what's going out there as possible. So I always try to, like, I think when I'm editing myself, I already kind of like I have the idea of what I wanted to do, and I'm just trying to figure out how to better convey it. Whereas if I'm working with another person, I'm trying to get them to understand what they were trying to convey and how to better get them there. So it's like, yeah, I think the self-editing is very much internal, whereas I think that's why I like editing other people's work too, because I feel like I get to learn what how other writers are approaching their stories and like what the process is for it. It's very much like for me, it's very much a symbiosis thing. I'm as much learning from the writer as they are from me.
Awesome. So my next thing, as I was thinking, is why don't all of us talk about our own editing process, and let's talk about problems maybe that you're having, and then all of us, or mainly Brent, can tell us like, oh, let's do this or whatever. So Marshall, do you want to start?
Yeah, because that'll lean into kind of what I was going to throw at Brent anyway. One of the things that I know I do sometimes, I'm getting better at it. And I know a lot of writers or early writers do this, but for example, when I go back to my current work in progress, which I haven't touched in a couple of months because life's been crazy. When I go back, I guarantee I will read, at least the last few sections of what I last wrote, right? I have a bad habit of starting to change things as I'm doing that. And I know this is a hindrance, obviously. This is something that I run up against. It's like, okay, well, I don't like this. I'm already going to change, so I'm just going to change it right now. Is that something? I mean, and I'll do it sometimes, and other times I'm like, I'll put a little note or something, because I work all digital anyway. I can just put a little note and then I move on. But I know some people really get caught up in that. They'll write something Monday, and then on Tuesday they'll come back, reread it, rewrite parts of it, and try to move forward. But that it becomes a bit of a slog. I don't know if there's a question in that, but I'm wondering if you've encountered that, or if you've pushed past that, or if you have advice for like folks who run up against this.
Yeah. So, what I would say is it's probably best to not try to completely avoid that. If that is something, because what you don't want to have happen is like you try to push past not doing that and you end up just fixating on it the whole time you're writing that day. So what I would say is like moderation. Fix the last paragraph, or fix a couple of sentences. If that's going to be what it takes to kind of like get you to calm down a bit and press forward. Like, because I would say trying to cold turkey not do that when it's been a habit for a very long time, it is going to make you fixate, and you're not going to do your best drafting. So I would say do a little bit, but also what I would say too is that when you're drafting, if you want to avoid that, end at a point where you already know what's going to happen next. Don't stop when you ran out of story or whatever. Like if you like say for instance, I'm writing a story about someone's robbing the bank, blah blah blah. I know that they're about to pull out their AKs and go into the bank. I'm gonna stop right at the moment they're about to pull out the AKs, even though I know that's what they're about to do, so that when I come back the next day, mentally, I'm able to jump right back in because I know I already know immediately what's going to happen next. So I don't have to do a bunch of rereading to catch myself up. So, and I think sometimes the advice we're given as writers is like, you just write until like you either got to stop or you don't know like where the story is going next. But sometimes it's a good idea to stop when you already have a very clear idea of where the story is going next, because you can just jump right back in the next day.
Yeah, I've also heard, some writers say they stop in the middle of a sentence, that they know how it's going to end, and for a similar reason. But as far as my process, to go back with what Will was saying, as far as my process goes, what's helped me in my editing when I go back, especially if it's a short story or something smaller, is because I work digitally and I can't write things down and have it make any sense. I don't have journals. I can't do Post-it notes. I can't do any of that stuff. So, most people know I use Scrivener, but what I do is I make a copy of it. And so, because for the longest time I was working in like Microsoft Word, and I wasn't really, this is a long time ago, I wasn't really saving and making a new document. You know what I mean? And so what I'm doing now is I'm just labeling it draft 1, draft 2, and so however long that goes. So the original is there, and then I can do whatever I want to this draft as I read it. And so that's kind of what I've been doing to save my sanity, because otherwise I'm going to get caught up in what I was saying earlier. And that's really what I'm trying to avoid. I want to try to move forward with the editing and not get bogged down in the little tiny things. So is that what we're supposed to be doing here, Will? Am I doing it right?
Yeah, this is good.
Okay.
Nick, talk to me about your editing process.
I don't.
You don't edit?
I don't right now. All right, let me. Oh man, we need to post our videos.
Yeah, that was a good moment. I'll grab that one. I'll grab that one.
I actually haven't edited anything in like 6 months, 7 months. I hit a point of, I mean, man, like it's crazy. Think where I was 2 years ago when we started this to where I am now. So my writing has definitely leveled up. I'll say that. However, my editing skills haven't leveled up, haven't caught up to where I feel like my writing is. So I was actually struggling with finding problems in my stories, with finding my major plot holes. Like I wasn't seeing it in a lot of my short fiction that I was writing. However, my novel I wrote, I was able to see a lot of it quite clearly. So I kind of hit a point of frustration of knowing I'm not at a point where I can actually edit my own stuff and be okay with it. I need to level up my editing skills. Therefore, I need to level up my reading skills. So I kind of just stopped editing. I just do first drafts right now of everything. I haven't written any short fiction. You guys should be aware by now of my struggles over the last 6 months of writing, and I'm just now getting back into the swing of things and writing like 500 words a week right now. It's great. Feel accomplished at the moment again, but yeah, my editing process, what I'd like to do and what I want to start practicing is the layer technique, or the way Brent does it. Work on plot, work on character, things like that. So yeah, I hope that answered your question well to satisfaction.
Okay, awesome. Does anyone have anything else they want to add? Questions, comments?
Yeah. Don't be afraid to read books about editing.
Well, you gotta tell us your process, Will.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah,
Will.
that's what I was waiting for.
Oh, my process? I'm not sure I have a process yet. I think I reread what I write and I don't like it. And then I put it down. And then I reread it again and don't like it. Then I put it down. And then I know when things aren't working. I just usually have to put it down and figure out in my head what isn't working and what don't I like about it. I still struggle with editing. This is why I wanted to do this episode, because it's something I feel like I'm not good at. But also, I just want everyone to know that this is just where I am today in my head, not being able to look at myself objectively. I struggle with editing. I usually have to have other people read it and be like, I'm sorry, this is a mess, but tell me what's wrong with it. And then I wind up, they also tell me what's right with it, because usually I can't even see that.
I can attest to that.
I mean, I think this is one of those moments too where half the group, like I have a half-assed editing technique. Brent has a full-on technique, tried and true, done multiple times. And Will's in a different place and Nick's in a different place. I think this is one of those moments, as we were talking about in our last episode when we're kind of putting ourselves out there. We have our Discord channel. We have places where people can talk. And we have, and like you said, Will, if you can't see it, and Nick said this too, you read it, you can't see the flaws in it, give it to someone else, right? This is why we have beta readers. This is why we have our community. And this is why we're all sitting here talking together too, is to learn how to do this while we're in writing groups and all that kind of stuff too, right? So I think Brent gave some amazing advice this episode, but at the same time, every single person's technique is going to be different. And so we have the Discord channel. I don't know, throw in there, folks listening, what your editing techniques are. Help us out. I mean, some of us are still struggling with this. You know what I mean? Like I said, I just make a new copy so I feel like I can change it and then just change it as I go. Like I'm not as organized as Brent, but also I probably spend too much time world building as well. So, I mean, there are a lot of things that we can get better at. And this is when we need to lean on our community for sure. So any other thoughts?
So, well, it's good that you brought that up, because that is one thing I was thinking about. Like, beta readers are so key in like getting better at editing, but you also have to be very like precise in how you use them. So one thing I would like offer as advice is be very specific in the questions that you ask your beta reader. Don't ask them like what worked and what didn't work. Ask them, where'd you get bored? Like, can you tell me exactly when you got bored in the story? Or like, did the opening sentence work for you? Or which character resonated with you and why? Like, I think being specific like that helps you, but it also helps the beta reader figure out, okay, I know what they're really looking for from me. So let me make sure I'm focusing on these things while I'm reading it. So like I keep like a little standard list of like 10 questions. I'll like send it to my beta readers and I can't remember all the questions off the top of my head, but like one of them is like, where do you feel like the climax happened? Or like, because if they thought the climax was a different place than I actually did, then that's a problem. So, just like being real specific with the questions you ask your beta readers, I think will go a long way in helping you identify like the strengths and weaknesses in your story. And there was something else I was going to say. So, I guess for me, like, because Marshall's point is very true. Everyone has different techniques. So don't be afraid to experiment with techniques, because the only way I've gotten to like where I'm at is by experimenting. And I still experiment. Like, I don't think like there's ever, I don't think as a writer or as an editor, there's always room for growth. There's always room to learn. There's always room to try new things. And like different techniques. Like there's just so many different techniques out there, and don't be afraid to switch between them and use different ones for different projects to see if it works for you. It may or may not, but I guarantee you'll learn something from it regardless. So.
And this has been Just Keep Writing, a podcast for writers, by writers, to keep you writing. You can find us at justkeepwriting.org. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Feel free to reach out to any of us on our social medias, and please jump in our Just Keep Writing Discord channel. Links to all of that is in the show notes. Lastly, please support our show by going to patreon.com/justkeepwriting. We offer daily writing prompts, early access to podcast episodes, and much more. Thanks for listening, and just keep writing.